Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausan Pereira. Saudi Arabia accused Iran of ordering this week's attack on key oil facilities, stoking concerns that the world's largest oil-producing region is edging towards another war. Crude prices also rose as a result. Prince Khalid bin Salman, the Vice Minister for Defense and brother of Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler, said on Twitter that Tuesday's drone attack, which was claimed by Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, undermined efforts to heal the divided country. His comments came as Saudi-led forces launched retaliatory airstrikes against Houthi positions in Yemen, where the United Nations is working to end a 4-year war that's killed thousands and left millions facing hunger and disease. The Houthi attacks on 2 Aramco oil pumping stations forced an important east-west pipeline in the kingdom to close and added friction in the Gulf, where the US has tightened sanctions against Iran, demanding it stop supporting paramilitary groups across the Middle East, including the Houthis. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the fragile situation in West Asia or the Middle East. Joining me on the program today are KP Fabian, former ambassador, Professor A.K. Pasha, Center for West Asian Studies, JNU, and Talmiz Ahmed, former ambassador of India to Saudi Arabia. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador Ahmed, I'd like to begin the program with you. Let's first try and analyze and put into perspective the present situation in West Asia.
I think the present situation is extremely dangerous. The United States has deliberately escalated the conflictual scenario. It has moved troops and aircraft into the region in large numbers and has made extremely bellicose statements. At the same time, coincidentally, Saudi Arabia and UAE have also announced that there was a low-key, low-level attack on their tankers at Fujairah. And now the Saudis have announced that there was an attack on their pipeline from the Houthis. All of this seems to be somewhat coincidental. There seems to be an attempt, largely directed from Washington, D.C., that they want to somehow escalate the conflict with the Iranians, somehow get the Iranians to do something provocative so that they would have an excuse for war. Indeed, from Riyadh, we have already heard that they would like to have a quick, sharp assault upon the Iranians. I can very categorically state here, there will not be a swift, sharp attack. There will be a regional conflagration that will pull in the entire West Asia into conflict because of these provocations from the United States.
All right. Professor, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. It seems very fragile, the situation. A lot of saber rattling going on even as we speak at the moment. There have been attacks on the pipeline. There have been counterattacks by Saudi on the Houthis in Yemen. What's your assessment of all of this?
Well, we have had similar situations before also, in fact, much more graver. But I think the present situation has seen, linkages between what the United States is trying to do in the Gulf by sending its one of the largest aircraft carrier, Abraham Lincoln, and then B-52 bombers, and then Patriot missiles. There is a steady build-up in addition to what the United States has in Bahrain, in Qatar, in Kuwait, UAE, Oman. So this is in line with what the National Security Advisor of US, John Bolton, has said, that there are provocations from Iran, although we have not seen what these are. And the second one is, it was quoted in New York Times yesterday, that a vessel carrying rockets was found near the Gulf of Basra, near Abadan and that area. In addition to that, the Americans have about 5,200 troops in northern Iraq and in Anbar province also. So their bases also were surrounded by Shia militias who are based in Iraq. So all this was presented as something of an orchestrated Iranian attempt to intimidate the United States, which has imposed sanctions on Iran and walked out of the JCPOA, along with what Israel has been egging on the United States. So this is nothing new to put maximum pressure on Iran because of what they say behavior against American interest or the American allies' interest in Iraq, in Yemen, in Bahrain, in Syria, and also in other countries. So there is this ratcheting up of tension from the United States side, and Iran also has been equally responding by saying that we have moved our missiles to the Gulf region, which are closest, and they will not hesitate to attack or launch them on American or regional targets. So the answer is action reaction. But I don't think this may lead to a situation where this may lead to an American attack immediately or an Iranian response, what they are threatening on the regional situation, because everybody is now calculating.
So this posturing is going to continue for some more time, is what you are suggesting.
Rhetorical posturing.
Okay. Ambassador Fabian, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. So what is the end game really as far as the United States and Donald Trump are concerned? Because, President Trump tweeted on Thursday suggesting that he probably does not want war. But so what's the end game? Do they want to bring Iran to the negotiating table? What is it really?
Well, it's very difficult to speak about the end game which the United States wants, because the United States has more than one policy. President Trump, the White House wants something. The National Security Advisor Bolton wants something else. And the Pentagon wants a third something else. In other words, American policy making is, to put it mildly, dysfunctional. You yourself said that Trump says that he doesn't want war. In fact, he has told his acting Secretary of Defense, I don't want war. And media have carried reports that he has told one or two people that Bolton has overreached himself. But let me put it this way. The situation is inflammable, as the previous speakers have said. But I'm not sure that there will be a war. But, war starts in the human mind. That is what the UNESCO Charter says. And I'm sure that in the mind of at least one human being called John Bolton, the war has already started. But as Ambassador Talmiz said, nobody should be under any illusion that a surgical strike is possible without starting a war. I mean, in India, we are familiar with the expression surgical strike, and we carried it out. It was a surgical strike,
Yeah.
But that's not going to be the case. And, Saudi Arabia, in the eastern part, they have a concentration of oil and their Shias. And the Shias, as Ambassador Pasha, Professor Pasha will tell us, there is great trouble going on there. The Crown Prince has been using the state machinery to suppress them. And they are not yielding. They are fighting back. So, should there be a war, then, the oil there, it is inflammable, and there can be serious consequences for Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
And I think Saudi Arabia also knows it. But above all, then of course you have to bring in Israel. What does Israel want?
Absolutely.
Now that Netanyahu has got re-elected, perhaps he may be less interested in having a war. But he would like to continue confrontation with Iran. The problem is this, when people say they don't want war, but still do things which give the impression that they don't mind a war, then, you see, it can happen.
Absolutely. All right. So, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, as far as the situation itself is concerned, I think everyone is in agreement that war is not good and no one wants war at this point in time. But the fragile situation, everything that's happening in the region seems to be having an effect all across the globe. And probably India is going to be most impacted as a result of what's happening in the region there, because most of our oil comes from there.
Yes. This is a serious challenge for India and for Indian diplomacy. We have to function at several levels. We have to convey to Iran that we remain committed to our relationship and to taking forward our project relating to Chabahar and the various other transmodal transport connectivity projects. At the same time, we must work out arrangements to purchase Iranian oil. This is the first point. Secondly, we must convey very emphatically in Washington, D.C., that its unilateral policy approaches are not acceptable, that they harm the relationship, they harm the interests of partner countries, and if the United States wishes to be a significant and viable partner for India, it cannot initiate policies that hurt India's interests over the medium and long term. So I think these are some of the things that we have to do. Beyond this, over the longer period, we have to work very hard to see how we can use this opportunity to create a multipolar environment. US leadership is no longer credible, it is no longer viable. I think this is a golden opportunity to work with like-minded countries to see how we can now have an alternative global scenario where various nations can work with responsibility and also promote their own interests in the very complex situation in which we are located today.
Okay. The situation is very complex, is what the ambassador is suggesting. Professor, Ambassador Fabian touched upon Israel and, Netanyahu's role in all of this. What does Israel want at the end of the day? And, are things going to go out of hand?
No, there are a couple of things before I come to that point. One is, we have to really energize our diplomacy. Apart from what the ambassador has mentioned about Iran continuing to buy oil and other things, we have the closest relations.
If I can just interrupt, you're talking about, continuing to buy oil from Iran.
Yeah.
How can we do that? What could be an option? Really, high sea transfer, maybe that could be a possibility?
Yeah, third party, we can always buy from third parties.
I think
Turkey.
we did it in 2012,
yeah.
if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, we are familiar with the entire process, how we are able to continue, if not on the same scale as second largest importer, at least quantum which can satisfy at least 4 refineries, Gujarat, Mangalore, Madras and others, which are dependent on Iranian crude, which is lighter and better for various products which we need. We have very good relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are the key players now in this entire tension which is building up through America against Iran. So we need to energize our diplomacy and see what best can be done with these two Gulf Arab strategic partners, as we call them, because we have huge stakes other than oil and the escalating oil prices, and that is the welfare and security of Indians, about 8 million of them. Supposing, God forbid, any attack were to take place in any of the GCC states, that will lead to an exodus. It will be a huge problem evacuating them to neighboring areas also. Secondly, our other interests related to exports and food security, because those are also closely involved, need to be taken care of because of the disruption. And thirdly, coming to Israel, we have good relations with Israel also. Netanyahu was here and Prime Minister Modi was there. We need to send a message across that, the tension is escalating beyond a red line, and that needs to be controlled in a way which will satisfy the countries involved not to cross the red line, which will lead to escalation. And also we have seen the United States, we are still not retaliating for the tariffs which America has imposed on our products and various other measures also. So we need to put across our point of view strongly and firmly with Washington and with Israel, and also coordinate with Russia and China, who are also, and Turkey, who are major players in this entire Gulf region. So in that way, although we are in the midst of change of government, but nevertheless the situation warrants that our diplomatic measures have to be energized to see how best we can arrest the situation from getting into dangerous zone. And also I think the MEA should look into the issues, how best we can look into some initiative to bring Iran and the Gulf neighbors on some regional working arrangement or table, so that if there is some initiative to bring these two parties warring factors, other major powers also would come. But the scenario is very clear. Russia, China, the European Union, they are not interested in the escalation of the situation. And also Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, has said there is no question of war.
Right.
And also Mike Pompeo, when he was in Europe on an emergency meeting, he said, you know, USA is not looking for war in this kind of situation. And the White House also is very clear. So nobody is really talking about war. And Israel, I think, also knows the implications of an escalating situation, and more so the Saudis and the UAE, who will be the most people to suffer because of any situation.
Sure. Ambassador, that having been said, do you see a role for India, a possible opportunity maybe, where India can play the role of a mediator, considering that we have good relations with all the stakeholders in the region?
Yeah, I'll come to that. But before that, I want to make a philosophical point. We have to think out of the box. We seem to be thinking that it is still a unipolar world in finance. That is, if America tells you, don't you have any business dealing with country X, then we are obliged to obey. That is the box we are in. I think we have to get out of that box. Ambassador Talmiz said that we should strive for a multipolar world. Yes, we should. But then we have to argue the case with the United States privately, politely, discreetly, diplomatically. Look, this is not on. That while you may decide not to buy anything from Iran or to sell anything to Iran, for you to say that none else shall do any business with Iran, no, that's not on. Okay? This is wrong. I mean, you have been doing it, but this has to change. But as I said, United States, especially President Trump, has to be tackled very, very carefully. He is capable of an impulsive reaction, which can be quite disastrous, well, for us and for him and for the rest of the world. So we have to handle it well. Again, as Ambassador Talmiz said, we have to, and this I had advocated earlier also, when President Trump in May last year walked out of the Iran deal. In fact, I had said that when President Trump was elected way back in November 2016, because he had already said that he would walk out, we should have then started discreet diplomatic negotiations with the importing countries and figured out whether anything could be done. And a clear message should have gone to the United States. Look, this is not on. You cannot impose your sanctions on us, you see. Now, that I don't think has been done. We should look at it seriously. Now, coming to our ability to convey to UAE and Saudi Arabia, well, that's important. We have good relations with them. They have good, they have stake in us. But at the same time, I have a feeling Washington is the key player. Once a message goes from Washington that it cannot support, for example, Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, I call it chasing the mirage of military victory. You're just chasing a mirage. You're never going to get it. As you know, the Congress has told the president, please, let us stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia for the war in Yemen. And Pelosi has told President Trump, look, you have no authority to start a war with Iran. And the intelligence briefing that was done to the Congress, they say that it was not good enough. So they want more intelligence, because the story is that, Iran has sent some boats with missiles and all that, and the American troops in Iraq and elsewhere, in fact, from Basra, I think they evacuated the consulate. They have reduced the staff in Baghdad and Erbil, the Kurdistan area.
Right.
So in other words, they are trying to create a situation that American lives are in danger. But I think this is a bit engineered, and they are really hoping that Iran will do something foolish, that is, and then they can pounce upon it. But this is a dangerous game, and all of us, India and others, who mean well for the United States and for the rest of the world,
right,
and of course for ourselves, should tell the United States. And the Europeans have said it, but they have a problem. They say it so meekly. They don't stand up. Of course, European Union is in disarray because of Brexit and other reasons, election. No, the rest of the world has to sort of stand up and tell the Americans. But as I said, this has to be done very discreetly, very subtly, very diplomatically.
Sure.
Otherwise, with Trump there can be trouble.
Okay, so the key really is Washington is what you're suggesting, and India needs to convey to Washington what really needs to be done. Not much can be done on the Saudi or the UAE front is what the experts are suggesting. Closing comments now from all my guests, starting first with you, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed. Is it time then that Indian diplomacy needs to take a stand finally and take a side really as far as the world order is concerned?
I think that is self-evident. We are committed to a multipolar order. We need to now give it concrete shape. I have been an advocate of a very robust Indian role to promote peace and stability in the Gulf. I have been saying this for several years. I have written about it extensively. I believe we are well placed. I'm not talking about mediation. I am talking about building confidence between those countries that distrust each other. And this is behind the scenes diplomacy. I think we are well placed to do this. We must now move beyond the kind of diplomacy we've had earlier with this region that has been bilateral and transactional. We should now think in terms of regional security. The next stage of our diplomatic effort should be to work with like-minded countries to see how we can promote a regional security cooperation arrangement. That's a long-term process, a difficult process. But multipolarity means that other countries assume responsibility for their own interests. They cannot, if we are dissatisfied with a US-led world order and its hegemonic interventions, then we must assume responsibility ourselves. We cannot sit on the sidelines, remain confined to South Asia and not do anything. We have to become proactive. I think the opportunity is there. I think the credibility is there. I think the capacity is there.
Okay, Professor, are you surprised in China's role in all of this? Because, China is a major stakeholder. China, gets a lot of oil from Iran as well, but hasn't said anything, any strong words about what's happening in the region.
Yeah, I see they are under pressure from the United States because of the tariffs which have been imposed on nearly $300 billion of exports to the United States, and they are worried about the implications on political stability of this American move, because President Trump has threatened to impose tariffs on an additional $300 billion. So it is a real challenge for the Chinese leadership economically, but it has huge political security implications. Number two, the Russians also are facing sanctions. So what President Putin would do otherwise to support the Chinese, he is also lying low for various reasons. But I think that should not act as a constraint on Indian diplomacy to coordinate with China and Russia, and also with the European Union and other partners. Because, the United States, I think, is taking it for granted our response, that we are parked somewhere there on their camp. And on a number of issues, our policy is seen as weakness. So we need to send a firm message that Gulf is our extended neighborhood, and apart from oil and workers and trade and other strategic interests, a conflagration there, we are very near to the fire if it breaks out. So we cannot remain immune to the devastating consequences of external maneuvering and intervention there, because we have seen in the Kuwait crisis, then the Iraqi invasion, and now the Yemeni crisis. All of this is adding to our problems, and we don't seem our response seemed to be quite muted, and we need to send a firm message.
Sure. Okay. Okay. And Ambassador, quick closing comment from you on, on the best way forward. And also, is this going to be the biggest challenge for the next government?
Okay. Now, just to take on what Professor Pasha said, we need to send a strong signal. As a matter of fact, we did send a strong signal about S-400 system, which we were buying from Russia. And the signal went home. There were signals from Washington, we would do this, we would do that. No, nothing happened. In other words, the point to be made is the signal to Washington will be not that we'll always be obedient. I'm using plain English. I'm being non-diplomatic without being undiplomatic.
Right.
That message has to go to Washington. And you must have read that Pompeo had a word with Oman. And the media said, the officials said, Pompeo wanted to brief Oman about Iran's, terrible things which Iran is doing. No, that is nonsense. Oman was a country where America met Iran before the JCPOA, with the nuclear deal.
Right.
Oman is having, keeps in touch. So America also is looking for an opportunity to talk to Iran. Trump said, I have left my phone number with them and all that. Of course, Khomeini has said that there's no question of talking with the Americans. Now, that doesn't mean they will not talk.
Right.
Because they are not in a position now to say publicly that they are prepared to talk, because he also has a domestic constituency. I think what Indian diplomacy should do is that we should enter into, I repeat, discreet, confidential consultations with the European Union, but not only with the European Union, with the capitals in Europe, the major capitals, with Oman and with others, to find a way out. And in the past, we have done it.
Right.
Under Nehru, we have done it, whether it was Suez Crisis or Korea, repatriation of the prisoners of war. Indian diplomacy has certainly carried out tasks which appeared difficult, impossible.
Sure.
So we can do it.
Okay. So no, it's not a new avenue. We can do it really. It's time for us to take a stand, is what the panelists are suggesting on the program today. No war really, or it doesn't look like the countries in the region would like to go to war, because it's not going to end up too well for anyone in the region or the world as such. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.